Well, I hope that you're having a great day so far. We're continuing our studies in the book of Romans this morning. Um, I've said to you previously that this series of studies online was originally intended to be a source of contact and study, primarily for a group of men that have been meeting on Monday nights here at Parkview Church of Christ to study the book of Romans together. And due to uh, the the virus and the spread of the virus, and the advice of local officials as well as federal authorities to not congregate in groups of 10 or more. Uh, we've discontinued our physical study on Monday nights, and this was an attempt to continue that study uh, through virtual format. I've heard from several of you other than those who've been normally meeting on Monday nights, and it seems that you would like for me to continue pursuing this study with you, even if we get to meet back together in the very short future, rather than discontinuing this study to keep doing it for the benefit of those who aren't here. So with that in mind, it's not that we've been given the green light to begin meeting together again, because we haven't yet, but just to alert you to the fact, or to make you aware of the fact that it's my plan for us to continue these studies for some time in the foreseeable future at least. We got to last time. This is our third study in the series of the book of Romans, and we said, just to quickly put ourselves in perspective and to get our thinking clear, we've noticed that Paul, before he begins explaining to us the nature of the gospel, the means and the method by which man can be redeemed or saved, that before he begins that discussion in chapter 3, verse 21, he begins in chapter 1, verse 18, and goes through chapter 3, verse 20, explaining to us why men are lost, why we need a Savior, why we need to be redeemed, what the condition of all men universally is and has always been due to sin without Jesus. In other words, salvation doesn't come up in chapter 1, verse 18 through chapter 3, verse 20. We aren't talking about how to be saved or how to be redeemed or any of those kind of things. We're talking about why we're lost, why a man without Jesus stands universally condemned. And we began last time talking about the context of chapter 1, verse 18 through about verse 23. That was kind of the section that we bit off, and I told you last time that we wouldn't be able to exhaust that study, and we're going to continue with that this morning. But before we do, let's begin reading in verse 18, and let's read these verses together. I'm reading from the New International Version, and I would invite you to get your Bible and read along. Beginning in verse 18 of Romans chapter 1, Paul said, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people, who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood by what's been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God or gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings, and birds and animals and reptiles." We were talking about last time that we're talking about a process, an ongoing process of God's wrath being revealed, not something that has happened as if it were a past event, not something that we're awaiting to happen in the future as a one-time event, but the ongoing revelation of God's wrath that's currently taking place. And I said to you last time that one of the ways that we can look at that, and very simply, and maybe too simply, to be honest about it, view or think of this wrath of God that's being revealed, is the process of sin becoming increasingly evil in our society, in our lives. I observe to you the fact that it's interesting to notice, especially in light of this text, that the sin that satisfies us and intrigues us today isn't the same amount of sin, isn't the same kind of sin that will fulfill us a week from now, or a month from now, or a year from now. I see it takes more sin. Once we begin going down the path of pursuing, suppressing the truth that God reveals and pursuing our own path, that sinful path, then it's an ever increasingly downhill path to destruction. What today is a curiosity, if we aren't careful, tomorrow becomes a habit, and very soon becomes not nearly enough to hold our interest anymore, and we have to find something more sinful, or something farther down the digression from God to satisfy us. Paul talks about the fact that the result of God's wrath, or God's wrath is the result of, better said, the fact that men suppress the truth rather than accept the truth. That by our sinful nature, when God reveals himself in the form of a law, or a form of a revelation in any form, that men habitually, universally choose to reject that revelation, or at least to suppress the truth of that revelation. And that doesn't mean that we have to deny the fact that there's a God, or that God has spoken. What it means is that we set ourselves up as the final authority. What it means is that when God says something, we always feel the need to have something to say back. My mother used to call that back talking, and I got into a lot of trouble over the years for talking back to my mother. And what that meant was that when she said something, I always had something to say back. Yes, but, or why can't I, and here we go. You see, God's wrath being revealed is the result of us talking back to God. And not just talking back, but living our lives as if we're talking back to God. He says in verse 19 that God's response, or verse 18, that God's response to man's wickedness, his suppressing the truth, is the revelation, the ongoing revelation of his wrath. It's this process, as we said in verse 24, verse 26, and verse 28 of the same Romans chapter 1 that we're studying, God turning men over to their sin. Now, that doesn't mean, as we said already, that God gives us up, or that God gives up on us. What it means is that God says, if you want to continue pursuing sin as a manner of life, then I'm going to let you see just how terrible the consequences of sin become. I'm going to let you walk that choice, or walk that willful decision, and reap the results or the consequences. Because sadly, for most of us, we have to learn things the hard way, don't we? You see, when we fail to listen to God and we start thinking we know best, God says, well, I'm going to let you see just whether what you know is best or not. And in fact, it never is. It never is. God's revealing truth is a fundamental part of what this whole discussion, this whole context is about. And people have for a long time said that not everyone has been given truth from God, but Scripture teaches otherwise. Now, it doesn't teach that everybody's received the same amount of revelation from God, but it does say, for example, in verse 119, or verse 19 of chapter 1, that God has made it plain to them, the truth. In verse 32, they know God's righteous decree. And in chapter 2, verse 15, they show that the requirements of law are written on their hearts. You see, there's no one, from Adam to us, who can say that I haven't received revelation from God. It isn't the same amount of revelation because, for example, the Jews, via the law of Moses, received a lot more information about God than the Gentiles at that time, who weren't under the law of Moses, as it came to be referred to or called. But even if it's one law, in the case of Adam and Eve, at least so far as we know. We don't deal very well with one law. How in the world can the solution be for us to be given 10 more or 100 more or 1,000 more? You see, we can't be justified by law. And that's the conclusion that Paul draws at the end of this section, which is chapter 3, verse 20. We continue on, and now we get into some things that we haven't talked about last couple of times. The creation of the world, he says in verse 20, verifies the fact that God's revealed truth. And that the truth God has revealed is verified by creation. Now, many have read this verse to say that if the only source of information you have from God is the created world, then that's God revealing truth through the creation. Well, I want you to notice he doesn't say that he reveals truth by the creation. What he says is the creation verifies, or it explains, or we come to understand God's revelation as being true by observing the created world. The creation doesn't reveal truth about God. It verifies and supports God's revelation. The creation, for example, testifies to the fact that there is a God and that he's a powerful God. And it doesn't reveal the fact that if he's that powerful, he deserves to be worshiped or that there's only one God. But those are conclusions that a person who's thinking objectively could come to very easily. You see, one of the consequences, or one of the effects, one of the results of men suppressing the truth, as Paul says, is that we begin worshiping things that aren't God. We begin calling things that aren't divine our God. And whether we're talking about the practice of idolatry in the Old Testament, where there were literally hand-carved images that men bowed down to, and as there are in places in the world today, or whether it's the cultures in the world that have worshipped things like sun, the sun, the moon, or any one of a number of other objects of creation, the truth is God says the created world supports or verifies, not reveals new information, but supports information that God has already put in our heart. That law that he refers to in chapter 2, verse 15 as having been written on our heart, that you remember we said must have occurred in the Garden of Eden when we became partakers of the tree that was forbidden, the name of which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The creation testifies to and supports the revelation that God's already made to all men, the law that he's already put in our heart. Quick question. If the creation supports and testifies to the fact that there's a God and he's a powerful God, then what does that say? What does that say about the theories that have become, well, very popular, it seems, that talk about the world's origin as if it were a chance or just a circumstantial event that happened to occur when the right mix of chemicals occurred, or the right distance from another planet, or some other such natural circumstantial event occurred. How does this text speak to the modern explanation of the world just happening to come to order, or having come to the level of creation that we know? How does that coincide with what this text, and of course many others, but this text at least, what it tells us about the fact that creation, rather than teaching chance, teaches God? It shows that there is a God, that there has to be a God, because things couldn't be of the natural order or the order that they are were it not for a powerful, all-knowing God. He goes on in verse 21 through verse 23, and he says "for," and begins in verse 21 in the New International Version. And it's almost as if he's saying because. And the because is the fact that God's revealed himself and the creation testifies to that revelation. And men choose rather to suppress that revelation consistently, habitually, universally, and the result is God's wrath. The result is God's ongoing revelation of his wrath. Because, or for, although they knew God, how did they know God? By the revelation he made to all men, by the created world testifying to the truthfulness of that creation. He says, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being, and birds and animals and reptiles. Now, I'm really anxious to get into the idolatry part of that discussion, but he begins the discussion in verse 21 by telling us that the way this works itself out in human life, the way we respond to God's revelation and the creation's testimony about that revelation, is that we start thinking of ourselves as being the final authority rather than God being the final authority. We start questioning, yes, but. We start hearing God declare the truth of any given situation, and rather than accepting it as face value, rather than accepting it because he's God and I'm not, we begin second guessing or talking back to God or thinking back maybe to God and questioning, well, what about? Or maybe if this were true. You see, man responding to God's revelation that results in God's wrath being revealed is the consequent, first and foremost, of a man setting himself up in the position of being God rather than God being God and us being his creation. We begin thinking that we're the ultimate authority, and we begin remaking a God who thinks the way we think or who looks the way we look, rather than us being transformed into the image of God. We remake God to look and think the way we do. That's why, for example, the doctrine that puts man at the center of the world, at the center of the universe, is such a dangerous thing. In fact, it's the reason, Paul says, that God's wrath is being revealed when we begin thinking of ourselves as the final authority. When we begin thinking, I know what's best for me. I know what's right for me. Truth is relative. Truth becomes relative. And really, when we reject God as being the ultimate revealer of truth or the ultimate authority, then we're left with nothing but subjective judgment. We're left with nothing but relativity. Many people have assumed, and I'm kind of chasing a rabbit here off on the sideline here, but many people have thought and pursued the idea that what we really need to better humanity or to improve a human condition is we need our politicians to be more honest. We need to make more money. We need to make more laws. We need to do this, we need to do that, and all those kinds of things. Well, I'm not going to say that we don't need more honest politicians, because we do. I'm not going to say that we don't need more clearly honest laws, because we do. But I want to say to you very plainly, the solution to the human problem of sin has nothing to do with politicians or money or laws. What it has to do with us putting God in his place of ultimate authority. What it has to do is us putting God as the final spokesman on the matter of what's right and what's wrong, what's true and what's false. Rather than second guessing God or talking back to God, rather than suppressing the truth, we accept the truth. We follow God's revelation as if it were the final word, because in fact, it is. And when we refuse to acknowledge that it is, we suffer the consequence, which is this ongoing revelation of God's wrath against the suppression of truth. You know, it's an interesting study and an interesting thought process when we begin understanding that most of the issues, in fact, all the things that are wrong about the world in which we live and about us being part of the world in which we live, that all of what's wrong in our world is the result and the consequence of sin. And us, rather than turning to the only source of truth, keep trying to figure new strategies for working it out ourselves. Well, there is no solution for working it out ourselves. That doesn't mean that we don't play a role. It doesn't mean that we don't submit. It doesn't mean that we don't cooperate with God. What it means is we're not God, and that there's no true solution to the problems that mankind faces, ultimately sin, that the answer doesn't come directly from God, because we aren't the final authority. We aren't even any authority, not the final one. But he moves on. He moves on, and he says, not only do men begin thinking of themselves as the final authority, although, he says, verse 22, they claim to be wise, they in fact become fools, and then exchange the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal humans, birds, animals, and reptiles. You know that idolatry, idolatry is the result of a man choosing to suppress the true revelation that God's made to him rather than accept it. That's the reason idolatry exists. And really, if you think about it at its most root level, idolatry is us as humans making an attempt to make God look, think, and act the way we think he should look, think, and act. Not accept the truth that God's revealed about himself, but us remaking God into an image or into a being that we have come up with, that we think he should be, and that says the things that we want to hear. You know, idolatry, that's a deep well, that's a big subject. You go back in Old Testament history, and of course, idolatry was an ongoing problem, an ongoing issue, not just among the Israelites, but the rest of the world as well, because in fact, much of the world of the Old Testament was given over to idolatry. It was a normal, common, accepted practice. But the truth is, sometimes we think of idolatry in the wrong terms, because we think of idolatry as being only someone falling down and worshiping an image of some sort. And maybe texts like this one, where he describes idolatry in those terms, lead us to that conclusion. But ultimately, the truth about idolatry is, which is a consequence of us rejecting the truth. The reason idolatry exists and what form it takes, is anything that replaces the position in our life, in our heart, in our mind, that only God is intended to occupy. You see, when I make my job, when I make making money, when I make my family more important to me than God, that's idolatry. That's idolatry. Maybe a little different form than what we're accustomed to thinking. But when we make a God out of something that isn't worthy to be called God, we become idolaters. We begin practicing idolatry. Let me just, at the risk of hurting someone's feelings, make the statement that as Americans, as Americans, we are greatly tempted to make making money an idol. And we begin, and again, I want to be careful how I say this, because I know there are circumstances where a man needs to provide for the needs of his family, and that makes certain situations in his life different than others might find themselves in. But if we habitually put our job, our career, our making money ahead of God in our life, then we need to do a really serious search. We need to do a really deep reflection on what our priority is, or whether or not we're making a God out of something that isn't worthy to be called God at all. Because there's only one God. There's only one true God. And when we suppress rather than accept the truth that he reveals, then we may profess ourselves to be wise. We may come up with a smooth sounding argument, but Paul says, in fact, we become fools. We become fools. And we start worshiping things rather than God who created those things. You know, the logical progression, I guess, for lack of a better way of describing it, of what happens in a person's life and in their thinking process, which begins with us thinking, well, I know that's what God said, but it sure continues down a progressively degrading path away from God, the result of which is God giving us over. God finally saying, okay, if you don't want to accept me as God, if you don't want to believe that what I'm telling you is true and accept it as the final authority, then I'm going to let you live your life with yourself in control and see how that works out for you. I'm going to let you see what money provides. I'm going to let you see what security you can find in a job or any one of 100 other things. You know, most of us, or many of us, have at least begun the process of being awakened to what we've always thought, or maybe what we've come to believe are the things that give us security in life, like having money or having a nice home or a nice car, which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with any of those good gifts that come from God. Unless we make them more important than God, unless they become the aim of our life, unless they're the things that we pursue at the cost or the expense of God's revelation. But it's interesting that some of us have lived long enough to begin seeing those things that I thought I couldn't live without, that I had to have, that were going to bring me peace and happiness and security, really don't ever do that. In fact, they make false promises. You can't have enough money to find security. You can't have worked enough years to find security, to find real purpose, to find real happiness. Those are things that only can come from a right relationship with God. And one of the ways that we consistently, we're talking about why men are lost. And the reason men are lost, at least he begins explaining to us, is because when God reveals himself to us, we start trying to make changes immediately. We start trying to think in terms of, yeah, but I think it would be better if we, or I like, or I enjoy. And that argument goes in so many directions. In fact, most religious discussions today, at some point, break down into a discussion of what I want, what I like, how I feel, what I think, rather than what God says. And the consequence of that path leads to an ever increasingly farther and farther from God path of evil. And the consequences are, well, as we've already said in a lesson or two back, a mind that loses the ability to even distinguish right from wrong or good from bad, that can call bad things good and good things evil or bad. And I have to say to you, and then I'll stop for the lesson today. I have to say to you, knowing the truth of that statement from Romans chapter 1, and looking at the situation in the world in which we live, I can't help but think about the arguments that are being forwarded in support of the murder of innocent children, termed abortion today, the defenses that are being given as a means of excusing or explaining, and the great effort that's applied to trying to make it the compassionate choice or the best solution in many cases. Well, I'll tell you what that is, and it's not just my judgment. It comes directly from this text. That's a mind that has lost grip on what the difference between right and wrong, good and evil is. When we can call evil good and good things evil, we're very far down the progressive slide away from God and accepting him and his will and word as final authority and his ultimate truth. We're very far down the path of I think, or I want, or I feel like, and us suffering the consequence of those choices, of those decisions, of that determination. I want to invite you to tune in again. We'll probably have another one of these this week. And one of the good things about YouTube is you have the opportunity to go back and re-listen to, or if you've missed one of the prior lessons, I've spent a lot of time reviewing, and if you've been around me very much, you know that I tend to do that. I assume that this is the first lesson that you've heard, even though that may not be true, and sometimes spend too much time reviewing. But I would encourage you to open your Bible, to read along, to study along, to take notes. And if you have a question, please, please, please. I'm not putting myself up as some kind of authority. I'm just simply saying, if God is the final authority, then we know where to find the answer. If I can help you with that in any way, I would love to do that. In fact, that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I welcome any comments that you have, any feedback that you have that would improve the format or help in any way. Or if you just want to make a comment, either in agreement or in disagreement, please feel free to do that. I welcome your input. I look forward to seeing you or being with you again next time. Thank you very much.